Here are two photos of the same man in the same year, 1968. In the picture on the left, the man is wearing a suit and tie. There is a folder in his hands. In the background, there is a new suburban home with a wide lawn in front. The location, Seattle, Washington. In the picture on the right, the man is wearing work clothes, a cigarette in his hand. In the background is pasture. The location, Libby, Montana. His name is Leo Hoppe, my grandfather.
Okay, so this was taken in 68. Compare this to...
This one.
Oh my God, look at that. That's pretty sad. So this was that whole I don't know what happened phase, was the months in between here.
What do you mean? What year was this?
This was 68.
Wow. It's a big difference.
It's a big difference. All four of us.
Mm-hmm.
So I was crying. I have a piece of candy in my mouth to get me to stop crying, which I don't think was like the best idea to give to a child, because then in all the pictures of this series that I've ever seen, I've got this big lump of candy in my mouth. So it was kind of hard for me to smile or anything. So I think this would have been our only picture ever taken professionally. And again, it was in those years when we lived in Seattle.
Well, I remember the photo a little differently because of Paula. I remember it like that.
Cropped out.
Yeah. During my childhood. It's kind of a shock to see another person.
Well, I haven't seen her in 25 years. I did it because it was the three of us. I don't think of her as a sister because we never had that relationship. So I don't, obviously I was too young to remember her in this picture, but I don't have a lot of memories of her. The ones I do are not that fantastic of memories, I guess. So I don't really.
Well, you know, they did get to name me, so I guess they can wiggle my head around and bop me one all they want.
Wait, they got to name you?
You've heard that story.
No.
Florence wanted to name me Prudence, and the three older kids said, no, you can't name her Prudence. That's a horrible name. And so she said, well, I don't care. Name her whatever you want. And so, as three young children would, they came up with Penny. Drove back in there, yeah. Drive down this road that's marked no trespassing, which I kind of hate to drive down. Mm-hmm. Although it's for sale. Should we drive down it?
Yeah.
I just have no idea what we're going to find down there, though.
Mm-hmm.
Because you go about a quarter of a mile down there, and so, and when we lived there, I mean, we were it. So, I mean, we're kind of out in the middle of nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we could tell him we're looking to buy it. But that's where the trailer was. And we could see that. Oh! We could see the lake from there.
Wow. It's a good view.
Mm-hmm. That's funny. Those posts right there.
Mm-hmm.
That was our part of our trailer. Probably like, I don't know what the posts would have been for. Okay, well, we found it. Dear Marielle, my most immediate reaction to the home videos is that this wasn't my childhood. I think the films illustrated that within any family there are as many stories as there are individuals. Each person experiences their own truth, and that doesn't mean anyone else's truth is any less real or valid, just different. I now understand what Pat and Paula were talking about when they remembered their childhoods, but it wasn't mine. I didn't go to zoos or the World Fair or have a lot of presents at Christmas. What you have in those home movies are proof of the golden years, the years my older siblings would talk about before life changed. I don't know why life changed, and although I know from stories that Paula and Pat blamed Dad for those changes, I don't know that he was to blame. That was their perception, and it has to be through the lens of our mother's perspective because they were just kids, maybe old enough to remember, but not really to know or understand. My very, very earliest memories are of my father. He worked swing shift and would get home between 11 and midnight. I can remember sitting on his lap and being happy he was there, my mom trying to send me back to bed, and my dad keeping him with him just a little longer. I'm guessing I was about 3. My next memories are of living in Libby, Montana. I don't know why we moved there. I do know that life I remember was vastly different from what my older siblings would reminisce about. I remember my grandma Hoppe, but not my grandpa Hoppe so much. During those years, I remember having lots of cousins around, and of course Peggy was a constant companion. I remember going hunting and fishing with Pat. I don't remember Paula at all through those years. She was almost 10 years older than me and would have left home to join the Army. I would have just turned 9. We moved often. My dad changed jobs often. He was gone a lot. It's funny that I have positive memories of him, right? My mother, on the other hand, was always there, but never quite really there. She always seemed to be reading and pretty absent emotionally. We were very poor. Dad worked seasonal jobs. We lived off of food stamps and whatever meat he got from hunting. From my perspective, he worked hard to provide for his family. I think he made some poor choices and got stuck in a pattern of poverty, but he worked hard nonetheless. Grandpa Hoppe was an abusive alcoholic who my dad broke off communications with several years before he died. He took a stand to protect my grandmother when my grandfather threatened her life. She moved out and never lived with him again. My dad was the only one who didn't follow in his father's footsteps in alcoholism. I don't believe he went to his funeral. My dad had a lot of health problems. As an adult, I can look back and recognize that my father battled depression and anxiety. He suffered a ruptured ulcer and almost died. He was never really well again, and 3 years later suffered a massive stroke. It was very scary and life-altering. He went on disability, and financially it was pretty tough. He went fishing a lot and always grew a big garden. He was still working hard. Through high school, I worked nights as a waitress in a truck stop. I would get home around 11:30 and watch TV with my dad, The Tonight Show, Macmillan and Wife, McCloud. I remember feeling happy to be with him, much like when I was a little girl. I have been told that my father wasn't the great guy I remember, but this is my truth. I believe he wanted a better life for his kids. I believe he did the best he could. I always felt he believed in me and supported me in working hard to achieve more than he was able to. I would also probably have the harshest perspective of my mother. I always felt she was a different, maybe even a better mother to my siblings. As a child, I worked to get noticed by her. When I left for college, Florence was very angry and said it wasn't fair I was getting a chance to get out. She wouldn't say goodbye the day I left. I was 17. I was 25 when my dad died. Peggy and I were at his bedside, holding his hand, telling him we loved him, but that it was okay, that we would be okay. I didn't have the best of childhoods, but I wouldn't trade my dad for anything. I wouldn't know it that day, but I would never see Florence again. I would eventually come to realize that what I had lost was the obligation to keep trying. I walked away from her for self-preservation. I wouldn't allow her to impact my family. We all define family a little differently. For me, family is a shared history, a common goal to support and nurture. They say you have two chances with family, the one you were born into and the one you create. I think it's important to understand where we come from, but not to be defined by it necessarily. We have to find our own path. Watching those home movies, it was like looking in the window of someone else's family room. Interesting, but very sad at the same time.
Dear Mom, when I was diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, I felt so alone and scared. The first time I was taken to a psychiatrist, I stared at the ground the whole time, listening to you and Dad discussing my illness. I remember you mentioned that you should have noticed the signs and have taken me earlier. I remember how scared you sounded. I always thought you meant my actions during my life were the reasons. But from the sentence in your letter, I finally understood. It was your dad, Leo. I wonder if you ever tried to not see the signs, to not be reminded of your father in such a way. It must have been difficult for you to have to go through such a similar experience. I wish you had told me sooner, had told me when I was going through such a tough time. I sometimes wonder if you understand how much your family means to me. Growing up, I heard very few stories from you about your family. Usually I would get information just in passing, a quick mention that I would keep away, to keep the tidbit because it was all I had. You had a father you loved, who passed before I was born, a grandmother named Mary. I knew Mary was Native American, taken from her family to be raised in a Catholic missionary when she was very young. When I started to look for her history, I was excited for the potential new stories and connections. Sadly, I was unable to find much of anything. However, through your personal tales, I can imagine her life. One of my favorite stories as a child was how you came up with my name. The first half comes from Mary, and the other half is connected to my grandfather Leo. It made me happy to be connected to them. I was always careful about asking you about the past. I remember fondly when you mentioned Grandma Mary while we were in Hawaii waiting to get on the flight back home. There was a family with little kids, parents, and an elderly woman. You remarked that the woman reminded you of Mary, white-haired, smiling, and sitting quietly by herself. I could tell for you this was just an observation, but for me, I was amazed. I tried to imagine Mary being in my life, someone like this woman, how my life would have been different. While reading your response to the films, I was overwhelmed. I knew bits and pieces of your childhood, but to see evidence of a life you never knew, images which to me were familiar, became very emotional. We are very close. To see you physically react to images of your family spoke volumes. You loved seeing your father. The very few times he showed up, you would smile and point him out in excitement. The same with Mary. In learning about your family history, I know I am receiving the good with little of the bad. When we visited Aunt Peggy, she would mention drunken parties and disturbing images. mentioning them as if I already knew. She also told funny stories that the two of you would laugh over. I wish I had recorded the whole thing, but I was so absorbed by the information, the stories I was never told. She mentioned that I reminded her of Grandma Mary. Afterwards, I felt a renewed sense of being. I needed to uphold her memory, to deserve to be compared to this strong woman my mother looks up to.
That's so sad.
This isn't what I expected.
That's sad. That is just really sad. What I remember, my dad basically, well, they raised all 6 of their kids in that house. What an eyesore. My grandma was very proud of it when she lived there.